Hi, I'm Hannah and this is Rachel and we're Low Profile and we're going to be talking about Impromptu.
Impromptu is layered sound work performed by Gary Mullen, who is a renowned Freddie Mercury tribute act and winner of Stars in Their Eyes in the year 2000.
And in this work, Gary's performing a score inspired by the late Queen frontman's extensive vocal improvisation games of call and response at Queen concerts.
At the time, we were working with Lindsay Hughes at ICIA on the project called Picture in the Paper, and Lindsay asked us whether we'd also like to make a new work for a solo exhibition at the Edge in Bath.
Which was really open. I mean, Lindsay kind of told us what space we could use and then kind of left us to kind of develop a proposal. We were making Picture in the Paper, as you said, and we were really interested in thinking about groups through that project and bringing people together. So we had spent a lot of time researching and thinking about groups and how that manifests on a bigger scale. So whether or not that's at a football match or like a concert or maybe a protest. So we've been watching these videos of how crowds behave at concerts and matches and at protests, and in particular we're interested in what they would do kind of like in the in-between bit, so like before it would start or kind of in the break perhaps, and had been watching lots of videos of kind of crowds doing things like noise making en masse or
like Mexican wave that goes around the stadium, or different types of displays like where people are holding up a card or something like that and become part of a like mass picture in the stadium.
Yeah, so these kind of acts in unison where by coordinating, whether or not that's through noise or through doing something with their bodies, that they could create some kind of spectacle, or they could create something that was bigger through joining together with others.
And then, of course, like this reminded us of watching videos of Queen gigs and this type of like call and response game that Freddie Mercury, the frontman of Queen, would do with the audience, where he would sing out and then the audience would answer back. So they would sing back what was being sung to them.
I think that we were excited about these ideas of kind of what it means to amplify your voice by doing something quite simple really in unison with others, and this type of synchronised action and what's possible through joining together with other people. So the actual process of then making the work involved us spending a lot of time finding all the clips that we could of Queen gigs and trying to find the parts in the concert where Freddie would do this call and response game with his audience. You know, so there was kind of quite a lot of scouring that we did to kind of gather together that material. And then from that we created a score. So we were listening to what Freddie was doing in quite a simple kind of basic way, recording that. So, you know, trying to listen out for those patterns and the different phrases that he would use and then kind of write that down.
And it was kind of fun trying to write it down as well, because these aren't like recognisable words necessarily, they're more like sounds, and they're sounds that are elongated or become shorter, you know, depending on what he fancies on that day or on that evening. And so that sense of like there are things that are like patterns or things that are similar within these different performances, but there's also a lot of space for things to change.
And we started to develop our own kind of language really around it, didn't we? So we would know what, we could talk about him doing a hey-ho and know what that meant, or an A.
Or an A-up.
Yeah, and it would kind of, so we became really familiar with this material. And so from all of these kinds of collection, this kind of process of collecting all of these things together, we then created our own score. So we really wanted to find somebody who could perform this for us. And so we went through this process of like researching and trying to find somebody who performs as Freddie Mercury. And for both of us, we remembered watching the programme Stars in Their Eyes back in the 90s and early millennium, where people would dress up and kind of perform as their favourite pop stars and idols. And we could remember Gary Mullen performing and winning as Freddie Mercury and how brilliant he'd been. So we managed to track him down and get in touch with his manager, and then kind of pitched this idea to her, which was that we needed him to sing this kind of series of scores that we'd written of these kind of call and response games that Freddie does. And he was up for it. He said yes. So we flew to Glasgow and we met him in a recording studio in Glasgow and recorded him for an afternoon performing this score for us.
And Gary was great because he'd already had to make his own score like this to be able to perform as Freddie Mercury regularly, you know, as he kind of travels around the country and around the world doing this job. So he really kind of understood like what we were asking for and how to produce these sounds and how to perform them in the way that Freddie Mercury would have.
Yeah, so like our strange script that we'd made him with these kinds of like our own translation of what Freddie was singing, he actually really understood straight away. That was a language that he knew, and that he could also improvise around a little bit. He also knew those concerts, so like the ones that we'd found and been transcribing, he'd been watching repetitively to kind of hone his art as a tribute artist.
So we took these recordings and worked with a sound artist called Neil Rose to edit those and prepare those for the installation. And one of the things that we'd been thinking about as we'd been doing this research and as we'd been trying to work out what the qualities from those really large like stadium gigs that we wanted to replicate, we were thinking about like a bank of parkan lights, and that's what we created. So we set up a kind of large install of parkan lights, which are the theatre lighting that is used at large like rock stadium gigs. And these are programmed to respond to Gary's voice and the intensity of the voice. In the like dark space in which this work is shown, it's really like warmed and brightened each time there's a little burst of this impromptu singing.
Yeah, and then when it fades back to dark, that space in between the next vocal happening is timed so that if you were to sing back, that's the kind of amount of time you would actually need to sing back. So it's timed so that there's the space to allow an audience member to imagine that space of singing back as you would if you were at a concert.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that happens when you're kind of in with the work and experiencing it is that you suddenly feel that lack as well. So you're there on your own maybe, or with a small number of people in the exhibition space. And that's so different to that experience of like being in the crowd. So there's also something quite strange and maybe a little bit melancholy that happens with being in that space and hearing this singing and seeing these lights taken out of context. I really hope that it was moving and evocative for people. I know, like chatting with people who have gone to see the work, definitely there was a lot of experience of like, you know, the hairs standing up on the back of your neck type thing. And I think that was something that we were talking about quite a lot during the process of making, and especially when we were working out how to kind of transform these vocal recordings into something experiential, you know, like a full experience. Right, 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 all right.
Yeah, it's quite stripped back, and so what we're doing is allowing you to imagine the space of the crowd or the space of the audience. So we're kind of positioning them as the critical element in it. So Freddie's obviously always this big frontman, you know, the kind of the virtuoso performer at the front of the stage, the person that the crowd can never quite match or sing back, you know, as well as he can. But in our work, they become this kind of critical absence almost, and it's about kind of imagining the importance of that mass of people.
This voice and this music that is often just used for entertainment becomes like something else, becomes something bigger than that.
So there's real potency in that, and in the possibility of bringing people together through something like that kind of mass kind of cultural experience that we find really exciting. So I think through this project we learned a lot about what it means to bring somebody else into the process of making work with us. So bringing in a collaborator or an expert in their field to be part of the work. So in this case we worked with Gary as a vocalist, but we also worked with Neil on the kind of composition and the technical aspects of making the work. We also worked with a lighting designer on the work and on a team to kind of then rationalise and install it in the gallery environment. And that's something that we've built on from that point, and we continue to kind of bring in collaborators in who are experts in their fields to be part of the work that we make.
Yeah, I think the piece of work that we made in 2020 called Drum Roll definitely like shares a lot of DNA with this project, and that sense of, again, working with sound, working with things that are maybe quite familiar. So like the Freddie Mercury vocal, I guess, is familiar to a range of different people. And in drum roll, the motif of a drum roll is quite familiar to different people.
We're talking about drum roll in 2015 when we were making Impromptu, because we were talking about that kind of idea of, in the same way that mass vocal we were talking about and watching lots of drumming videos and things like that,
yeah,
weren't we?
like mass percussion,
yeah,
and
marching bands,
and like crowds of people clapping together, and yeah.
It was something that we wanted to do something with and we weren't quite sure what. And so sometimes these things take a while to percolate, and yeah, 2 years later we kind of picked that up and started doing these kind of experiments, working with drummers, and then it took another 3 years, I think, to then realise that as a work. But it's hugely kind of informed by Impromptu.